I hope you had a nice holiday. This short video will introduce the topic of measurement. So today it's just an introductory video. We're going to look at the three basic things we always need to think about when we measure. One is what we're going to measure. Two is the unit of measurement that we'll use. And three is the instrument that we're going to use. So let's start by thinking about what the word measure means. So if I asked you to measure this zebra, if you could catch it, then instantly your question would be, well, what will I measure about it? So I want you to pause the video now and think about what we could measure about this zebra, because there's more than one thing. Okay, so here are some things that you might have thought about measuring. You might want to measure how much the zebra weighs. You might measure how high it can jump. You might measure the height of the zebra, how tall it is. There's lots of other things you could measure as well, but these are three examples of things you might measure about the zebra. Similarly, if I asked you to measure this pizza, again, pause the video, think about things you might measure about this pizza. Okay, so you might measure the temperature of the pizza, how hot it is. You might measure the size of the pizza. You could also measure the angle of the slice that's been cut. So again, lots of different things that we can measure. And again, if we were asking to measure the car, what could we measure about the car? Have a think about it. So we could measure how fast it is, so its speed. We could measure how loud it is. We could measure how much fuel there is inside, or various technical things to do with the engine, if you're really interested in cars. So whenever we look at an object, it's not as simple as saying, we'll measure that. Some people think that measure is always to do with getting a ruler out and measuring how big something is. That's not true. In maths, measurement can be used for almost anything. Here are some things that we can measure. It's not a complete list. So we've got distance, speed, duration, which is how long something lasts. We can measure age, so how old something is. We can measure time. We can measure how heavy something is by measuring its weight. Volume, pitch is how high or low a sound is. Area, we can measure temperature, we can measure angles. So maths allows us to measure lots of things precisely. So not just saying, oh, that's quite a long distance, but saying, well, that is a distance of 25 kilometres. Or instead of saying that car's going quite fast, we can say that car's going at 40 miles an hour. Or instead of saying that person's very old, we can say, well, they're 97 years old. So we can measure things and we start to describe them precisely rather than just using everyday language. So a unit of measurement, once we've decided what we want to measure, provides us with what we call a standard way of measuring something. And it allows us to compare two or more things easily, and we're going to look at how that works now. Supposing that we want to compare these two cars, the car on the left has a top speed of 316 miles per hour, and the car on the right has a top speed of 120 miles per hour. So by using the unit of measurement, miles per hour, we can easily see that the one on the left is about 3 times faster than the one on the right. Similarly, if we look at these two buildings, the one on the left, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, that has a height of 828 metres. The one on the right, the Shard in London, has a height of 310 metres. So we can see that the building on the left is more than double the height of the building on the right. Because we put a number on it, we can be more precise than just saying, well, one's a bit bigger than the other. When we measure, we need to choose the unit of measurement that we're going to use. And units of measurement is a really big part of maths. If we want to compare two or more things, then we have to use the same unit of measurement for all the things we're comparing. So in the last example, it was easy for me to compare the two cars because we measured them both in miles per hour. It was easy for me to compare the two buildings because we measured them both in metres. As we're going to see now, it's really important that we do use the same unit of measurement for comparing different things, because if we use different units of measurement, it can be very hard to compare things accurately. One of these people is a double Olympic champion. I'll give you a clue, it's not the guy on the left. If I look at the number, the person on the left is running at 14 kilometres per hour, and the person on the right is running at 14 miles per hour. So they've both got the same number, but they're not running at the same speed. And the reason for that is that one of them is being measured in kilometres per hour, which is a slower unit of measurement, and the other is being measured in miles per hour, which is a faster unit of measurement. So if we look at the number, it looks like they're both the same speed, but in real life that's not true. Because we've used a different unit of measurement, it's hard to compare them directly. Here's another example. The picture on the left in New York in the winter is 32 degrees, and the picture on the right in London in the summer is also 32 degrees. But the unit of measurement is different. The picture on the left uses Fahrenheit, and the picture on the right uses Celsius. Because they are different units of measurement, the numbers don't compare easily. So 32 degrees using one unit of measurement is not the same as 32 degrees using a different unit of measurement. So this time I'm using the same unit of measurement, so I've converted both these speeds into kilometres per hour. And there you can see that the person on the left is running at 14 kilometres per hour, the person on the right is running at 22 kilometres per hour. Because we're using the same unit of measurement, it's very easy to compare them and see that the person on the right is quite clearly faster than the person on the left. Similarly, here the picture on the left in Celsius is 0 degrees and the picture on the right in Celsius is 32 degrees. Now that I'm using the same unit of measurement to describe both pictures, it's very easy to see that the picture on the right is much hotter than the picture on the left. And an instrument is simply a tool we use to measure something. So sometimes we can try and measure things just by estimation. So we might look at something and try and guess how long it is, or how fast it is, or how old it is, or how much it weighs. But to get an accurate answer, to get a precise answer, we have to measure it. So when we're measuring something, we have to choose the unit of measurement we're using, but we also have to choose which instrument we're using. And we also need to make sure how we know how to use it. So for example, if I want to measure how long something takes, so for example, how long it takes for somebody to run a certain distance, well, if I wanted to, I could use a sand timer, which is a very old-fashioned way of measuring duration, and it does work. I might use a stopwatch, either one like in the picture or on a phone, or if I wanted to be really precise, I could use light gates. The way light gates works, you can see in the picture there, is the lady runs through one set of light gates and it automatically starts timing, and when she goes through the next set of light gates, the timer stops and it gives an exact time. So these are all instruments that we could use to measure duration. Similarly, to measure temperature, the picture on the left is a mercury thermometer, which uses a substance called mercury that moves up and down to give you a temperature. The object on the right is a digital thermometer. So they're both instruments to measure temperature, and we might choose to use one or the other depending on the circumstances. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at measuring distance, which is going to be the first thing that we're looking at. Now, measuring distance is easy to learn when we're in school because we can do a lot of practical activities. It's harder to do remotely, so I'm going to leave you today with some practical activities that you can try at home. So measuring distance. When we measure distance, we measure how far it is from one point to another. We use a special set of units of measurement to measure distance, and these are known as the metric system, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Also, as with anything else, there are different instruments we can use to measure distance. So when we're measuring distance, we need to know, first of all, what distance means. It measures how far from one point to another. We need to choose a unit of measurement, and we need to choose an instrument to measure distance. So the units of measurement that we usually use today are these four here: millimetres, centimetres, metres, and kilometres, or some people call them kilometres. And they're arranged in order there from shortest to longest. So a millimetre is a very short unit of measurement, and a kilometre is a long unit of measurement. Now earlier I talked about the metric system. You may see sometimes, especially in older books or TV programs or on some American websites, you may see other units of measurement used which are called imperial measurements. So they're things like inches, feet, yards, miles. They're another unit of measurement, and we may at some point in the future learn about these, but they're not the units of measurement that are mainly used in Europe today. So that's why we learn the ones that are on screen at the moment first and foremost, because they're the main ones that are used. So millimetres first of all. So 1 millimetre is a very small distance. So a credit card is about, a little bit less than, 1 millimetre thick. or the thickness of a fingernail. So 1 millimetre is a very small distance indeed. And because it's a small distance, we use millimetres to measure things that are quite small. And we can measure millimetres using a ruler or a measuring tape. Centimetres are small distances, but not quite as small as millimetres. An adult fingernail is about 1 centimetre wide. Not everybody's fingernail is identical, but the thickness of your finger or fingernail is about 1 centimetre. We use centimetres to measure quite small distances, and again, similar to millimetres, we can measure centimetres with a ruler or measuring tape. When we get into 1 metre, we're starting looking at a longer distance. So 1 adult footstep or big child footstep is about 1 metre long. So we use metres to measure longer distances. Now we can measure metres with a metre stick, or sometimes with something called a trundle wheel that we'll look at later. And finally, looking at kilometres, I've written 1 metre, sorry, 1 kilometre is a longer distance. So the distance from the school to the Meadows tennis courts is about 1 kilometre long, and we use kilometres to measure long distances. So if we understand these distances, then instruments we can use to measure them. So a couple of these instruments you'll probably have, or you may have lying around the house. So you have rulers, which usually measure centimetres and millimetres. Measuring tapes, which are also used for that. A trundle wheel, if you haven't seen a trundle wheel is something that you probably won't have in your house, but we'll try and use when we're back at school. A trundle wheel is a wheel that you push along and it clicks every time you go a distance of 1 metre. So it's used for measuring distances in metres over a longer distance. Finally, and a big one these days, GPS. So GPS is something that we'll look at more in the future. But it's used for things like online mapping, satellite navigation. If you've got a smartwatch, that uses GPS, and that's used to measure longer distances. So we can't get a ruler out and measure a distance of 9 kilometres or 4 kilometres, but we can use GPS to do it pretty accurately. Here's some ideas today, just to get a feel for the different units of measurement. It's really important that when we look at measurement, that we try and actually get an understanding of the different things we're measuring. So the first activity today in your house, if you have a ruler or measuring tape, which many of you will have, then just experiment measuring different things around the house using millimetres and centimetres. Try to get a sense of how long centimetres and millimetres are. If you don't have a ruler or a measuring tape, you can just use your pointing finger. It's about 1 centimetre wide. So if you put your index finger out, if you're a child, if you look at the knuckle of your index finger, it's probably about 1 centimetre across. If you're bigger, it's probably about the width of your index fingernail, and there you can measure things roughly using your finger. Once you've looked at millimetres and centimetres, you probably won't have a metre stick at home or a trundle wheel, so if you don't, you can practice pacing out distances in metres. You can go outside and get a sense of how long things like 20 metres or 100 metres are. Finally, if you want to get an idea of how long a kilometre is, you can use Google Maps to find out how far 1 kilometre is from your house, and just go for a walk or a jog or a run if you want for that distance to help you understand how long 1 kilometre is, obviously taking care of traffic and so on. These activities, there's no answer sheet or set of questions, but it's useful for you to do that just so that you can get a sense of the distances. These are all things we would do if we were in school that we can't do, obviously, but if you try and do them at home, that'd be great. Tomorrow during the lesson, we'll look at some maths activities that will build on this, so if you can do it today, that would be great. And tomorrow, during the lesson, which is on Teams, we'll be reviewing what you did today and what you've learned today, and we'll also be looking at something really important, which is called conversion between millimetres, centimetres, metres and kilometres. So that was a starting point. Look through the slides as many times as you want, do the practical activities, and I'll see you for tomorrow's lesson.